Across the country, the number of people living on the street has steadily climbed year after year. That's according to statistics. In January of 2020, there were more than 580,000 people experiencing homelessness in America. But as we all know, the impacts of COVID-19 have pushed those numbers even further. So much so that now some states have an overwhelming number of homeless people taking over parts of their cities. They're no longer hiding away in alleys or perhaps sleeping in empty parking lots. A lot of these homeless people are now coming together to live in open spaces. They've built communities known as encampments. And according to experts, these spaces are becoming a large part of America's landscape. The homeless crisis in America has been an ongoing issue, but this time it's different. And with the pandemic still circulating and eviction moratoriums being questioned, more Americans could soon find themselves without a home. Joining us now to discuss more is local columnist at the Washington Post, Petula Dvorak. Petula, welcome to the show. Before we dive deeper, why are we seeing so many homeless encampments? Is this normal? What is driving it? Is it solely the pandemic?
It's a number of factors, and the number is increasing for sure. Every percentage is too much, of course, but the nationwide increase is really only about 2.2%. Again, any increase is too much, but what's really happening is their visibility is increasing, and that's where you're seeing a change. I mean, I've been writing and interviewing the unhoused for about several decades, and I can tell you this, it feels very different now. From Washington to New York to, I've traveled to Seattle, to Los Angeles, to Reno, to San Francisco, and the encampments that you see, as you said, had always been tents, kind of tucked away in an alley or an overpass, underneath a place to sleep and then zip up and then go out and live however you may. But they are becoming small cities now. And COVID does have a lot to do with it. They are, a lot of the folks I talk to are afraid to go into shelters because they're highly contagious. There are folks, there is an increase in folks who've lost their livelihood. A bottom dropped out of some of the working class. That's certainly a factor. One of the things that we don't always talk about when we talk about the unhoused is the hidden homeless. Folks who are counted as homeless but are really couch surfing, sleeping with an aunt one night, sleeping with a friend the next night. And this isn't happening anymore because a lot of those families simply don't want the risk of shared space.
Are there any other cities that are seeing unhoused people more than others? And why is that, Petula?
There are urban centers for sure, by dint of population and resources. It's funny because every time I write about this, I certainly get lots of emails from folks who say, this is a Democrat problem. This is all happening in cities run by Democrats. Statistically, that seems to be the case, but it's not exclusive. I went line by line to cities with Republican mayors, and they all are experiencing increases in encampments. Oklahoma City, Fort Worth, Miami, they're all seeing it. It's not a case, it's not a situation of politics or policy at this point. It's life circumstance. And I think what's happening is finally we may have to have a reckoning with how many unhoused people we really do have. When folks are going to return to their offices and return to their downtowns, I think they will be shocked at what they see.
How did we get here in the first place, Petula?
We got here because we are not necessarily a nation that believes that housing, unconditional housing, is a right. There are cities throughout the nation that have tried a housing first program. Their theory is, yes, there may be addiction, substance issues, domestic violence issues, job issues, mental health issues, but a lot of those can start to change when there's a house to go to, when there is a bottom, when there is a home and a roof over someone's head, they can then take care of the rest of the issues. Trying to live without a home is really difficult. I can barely make my appointments and all of the things that I have to do, and I have a car and a house and all the resources. But without those resources, people are having a hard time making that leap, and perhaps the advocates of the Housing First method are really hoping that cities might band together, might form a national coalition to try and really create an unconditional housing society.
Many people argue that America is one of the richest countries in the world. We shouldn't have a problem with homelessness. What is your response to that, Petula? Would you agree with it?
Well, we're a capitalist society, aren't we? And in a capitalist society, there are always folks who end up being losers. And that's where we have to decide what kind of society we want to be. Do we want to be a pure society where the losers don't have a social safety net, or do we want to be able to enjoy our riches such that we create a just society for everyone? That's a big moral dilemma we have right now.
It certainly is. In regards to shelters, do you think people who need them have access to them? Do they feel safer at these shelters a little bit?
No, not necessarily. I know it depends. A lot of folks in DC, I remember for at least a couple of decades of talking to them, are afraid to go to the shelters. Some of the shelters have fighting. Their goods are stolen, and especially now with COVID, they don't feel safe. We had here in DC, we had at least 525 cases, I think, of COVID, and I think at least 25 folks died of COVID who were unhoused and had probably contracted it in a shelter.
I have to ask you, what do you think the solution is here?
It's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Definitely we have, some cities have tried to abolish the encampments. They go in with a dumpster and throw everything out. But that just makes folks move and create an encampment elsewhere. Do we create projects? We tried that, and that didn't really work. The most successful cases I see are like what DC has done with small shelters for families. We had one of the most shameful things I've seen in many cities. We had an abandoned hospital that served as a family shelter here. It was DC General. It was in the same compound as our DC jail, our sexually transmitted diseases clinic, and the morgue. And then there was a hospital housing upwards of 600 families. In about 8 years, they managed to get rid of it, close it down, and move a lot of those families into smaller shelters throughout the city where they have services, they're not singled out in a horrible environment, and they have a better chance at making it.
Petula, journalists like you are so important. This is a perspective so needed. Thank you so much for your time. Local columnist at the Washington Post, Petula Dvorak. We really appreciate your insight here.